What's up? It's Debbie, and I am back with more True Crimes of Criminal Minds. I cannot believe we're almost all the way through season 1, and this is the last episode of 2022. And I just want to thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. This has been so much fun, and I appreciate the views and the comments and the likes. I love you guys so much, and this is so much fun. And I hope that this is the start of a very long, productive YouTube channel because I'm having a blast. So I would keep going even if nobody watched. But I'm glad that you do. And if you do, please subscribe. Okay, so this week we've got part 2 of Ted Bundy. And I will start off by giving you guys a refresher of my sources. And I believe this is the most sources that I have used for any one criminal so far in my YouTube journey. Okay, here we go. crimemuseum.org, allthat'sinteresting.com, thisinterestsme.com, the world's most evil serial killers, Netflix docuseries Conversation with a Killer, the Ted Bundy tapes, Wikipedia.com, ValeDaily.com, Oxygen.com, ABC4.com. So I wanted to make sure that I got this one right because there's a lot of victims. So this is why I use so many sources. So Ted Bundy Part 2. He is in Utah now. So let's get into it. One week after Amy went missing, Bundy struck again. On November 8th, 1974, 18-year-old Carol Durant drove her brand new 1974 Camaro to the mall to meet some friends. While she was there, she was approached by someone saying that they were a detective. He asked her for his license plate number, and he told her that someone had tried to break into her car. Could she come to check that nothing was stolen? She asked to see his badge and went with him after he showed it to her. She checked on her car and confirmed that nothing was stolen. The cop then asked if she could drive with him to the station to see if it was someone that she could ID. When she saw his VW Bug, she thought it was strange. Of course, it's not a cop car. But then she thought, oh, maybe he's just undercover or something, so I'm just going to go. I mean, he did show her a badge. Like, I'm not victim blaming, but a detective coming up to you in the mall, like, what was he doing? Just, like, going around the mall and asking people, is this your license plate? Like, how did he connect her to the car? That is one thing I've never understood. But I guess it is possible that he just wrote down a random license plate number and then was going around asking people in the mall if this was their car and then telling them that someone broke into it. And I don't know if this was the first time he tried that ruse or not, but it got her in the car. So then he pulled over onto a side road and he cuffed one of her wrists. And she started screaming and tried to escape. And he pulled a gun on her, but she was able to slip out of the car door. And he had a crowbar and he got out of the car and he was chasing her with the crowbar. And the way I understand it, I could have the logistics wrong, but I think what happened was she fell and then, or half fell, maybe, in the snow, and then, he came running at her with the crowbar, and then she just, like, turned over and was able to block the crowbar before it hit her in the head. And then I don't know, maybe the momentum of the throw that missed maybe threw him off balance or something. But anyway, she was able to run out into the road, and she heard a car coming down the road. And so she just ran out into the road and said, "Stop!" And then she jumped in the car and she asked them to take her to the police. 4 hours later, Debbie Kent was abducted from a parking lot. She was at the high school. I don't remember what town this is in. I'm sorry, but it's in Utah. She was at a high school watching a play with her parents, and her brother was at the skating rink. So her parents said, "Can you just run real quick and go pick him up at the skating rink and then come back?" And so she said, "Sure." But when her parents came out from the play, they saw that her car was still in the parking lot. And the only thing that they found in the parking lot that was a clue to what happened to her was a handcuff key that they found laying on the ground in the parking lot. And that handcuff key fit the handcuffs that he put on Carol Durant. So that is how they know she was one of his victims. After the disappearance of Debbie Kent, women started disappearing in Colorado a few weeks later. On January 12th, 1975, Dr. Raymond Godowski and his fiancée, 23-year-old RN Karen Campbell, were vacationing at the Wildwood Inn in Snowmass, Colorado. She went up to her room to get a magazine. Her fiancé saw her enter the elevator. And then on the floor they were staying on, her friend saw her get off of the elevator. And then after that, nobody ever saw her again. Her body was found 1 month later after some of the snow had melted. Next, he killed Julie Cunningham, a 26-year-old ski shop worker. On March 15th, 1975, she left work and she was walking to a restaurant to meet a friend. He was parked on the side of the road on crutches. He was pretending to have a knee injury, and he was struggling as if he was trying to get something into his car, and on the crutches it was very hard. So she was just walking by, and she stopped to help him. And when she did that, he beat her until she was unconscious, handcuffed her, and put her in the trunk of his car. He confessed to dumping her body in the desert, but he returned 1 month later and buried her somewhere else. On April 6th, 1975, Denise Oliverson, I know I'm not saying that right, Oliverson, I don't know, Denise Oliverson, was arguing with her husband. She stormed out of the house, got on her bike, and took a bike ride to clear her head. And her husband said she did that. When they would fight, she would go out, get on her bike, and then go to her parents' house on her bike. And then he would call later to see where she was. She's like, how long is she going to stay over there? Is she going to come back? And her parents were like, she never came over here. What happened? Her bike was found a block away under a viaduct, and her body has never been found. Although Bundy confessed that he disposed of her body in the Colorado River. Now, I have a hard time believing she's actually in the Colorado River because none of them were disposed of in water. She would be the only one. So, I don't know if that's the truth or not, but it doesn't really matter. He did confess to killing her, and they just have never found her body. On June 29th, 1975, 23-year-old Shelley Robertson disappeared. 7 weeks later, her naked body was found at the bottom of a mine shaft. On July 4th, 1975, Nancy Baird disappeared from the gas station where she worked. Her purse and keys were still in the store, and her car was still in the parking lot. Her whereabouts are still unknown. Now, a lot of these women, the reason why they know that it was Bundy, and this will come up later too, I'll say it again, but he never, ever confessed to anything until the very, very end, right before his execution, because he thought if he would keep confessing, they would have to go out and investigate and try to find these bodies, and then he would get a stay of execution and he would just live longer, which that would have only drawn out the inevitable, in my opinion. But anyway, that was his goal, and that is why he finally confessed. In August of 1975, a policeman was patrolling a neighborhood due to some recent burglaries. Now, um I also read that it wasn't just the burglaries, that there was one particular house, I think, that had teenage daughters, and the parents were out of town. So the police was like, they were, I guess, asked to keep an eye on the house or something. And apparently Ted was parked in front of that house in the one source. But then another source said that the cop was in the neighborhood because of burglaries and that Ted was driving slow through the neighborhood, and that the cop motioned for him to stop because he wanted to ask him, who are you visiting? Why are you here? Are you lost? Do you need help finding something? And he took off and didn't pull over. So the policeman chased him and he was stopped and arrested for evading a police officer, which, if he had just pulled over, answered a few questions, he could have gotten away. But his vehicle was searched and they found handcuffs, a ski mask, rope, an ice pick, and a crowbar. They asked Carol DeRanch to come to the station and she ID'd him in a lineup. And what's kind of funny about that is that Ted Bundy could change his appearance to the point that he almost looks like a different person. In fact, you'll notice that in some of the pictures that I'm going to show you. And what happened when they did the lineup, they did it knowing what he looked like at the time of the crime. And he came in and looked totally different. I don't know specifically if it was facial hair or his hair was cut differently or a different color. I don't know. But he looked so different that they had to scrap the lineup that they had. And they had to gather up as many police officers that had a similar look as they could to do the lineup. Because the first one that they prepared, they had to scrap. But Carol DeRanch was still able to pick him out of that lineup, even with the change in appearance that he had. On February 23rd, 1976, his trial began at the Salt Lake City courthouse. There was no jury, only a judge, and Carol DeRanch testified against him. He was found guilty of attempted kidnapping and sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison. But before he could go to prison in Utah, he was extradited to Colorado. In this trial, Bundy chose to represent himself. During a recess, Bundy asked to use the law library, and when he was left alone, which he never should have been, he jumped out of a second-story window and got away. And this is another crazy thing. I mean, the whole thing is crazy. He's crazy, or was crazy. He's gone now. He told journalist Stephen Mashad, who went to the prison to interview him, that he would get on the top bunk of his cell and jump off over and over and over again to strengthen his legs muscles so he could jump out the window of the courthouse. Man, what in the world? Like, if you're a guard, aren't you gonna say, quit jumping off your bunk? Like, I don't get it. But he went up into the mountains and he found a cabin, made himself at home, but ran out of supplies. So then he broke into a trailer. I don't know if that means trailer home or trailer like on a vehicle trailer. But he broke into a trailer when he ran out of supplies. And he was hungry and cold and decided that this had not been a good plan to try to hide out in the mountains. He went back to Aspen and stole a car. Once again, driving erratically this time, he was stopped by the police and taken to jail 6 days later after his escape. Now, another thing he did, I don't understand. He went to Aspen stole a car, left, was not caught yet, and then turned around and went back through Aspen to go the other direction. And if he had not done that, he probably would have got away, because they caught him when he was going back into Aspen. I don't know. The whole thing is bizarre. So he continued to represent himself, and he caused as many delays as he could. What I have learned from watching the lawyers on YouTube is that pro se litigants will do motions and all kinds of stuff, whatever they think they can do legally to get away with postponing the trial, they will do. And in this case, Bundy wanted it postponed so he could escape. He had another escape plan all ready to go. And he quit eating. I mean, he ate a little bit. Like, I don't think he ate nothing, because then the guards would have been suspicious. But I think he just ate so little that he lost so much weight that, and I'm going to show you the picture of this. I don't know the dimensions of the hole, but in their cell, the light fixture, somehow Bundy got a map of the jail and realized that the head jailer's apartment was right above his cell. And there was a light fixture. And what he did, anytime he was alone in the cell, if his cellmate went out to exercise or eat or whatever, anytime that he was alone in the cell, he would work on that light. He would take the light fixture down, and he traded another prisoner for a small hacksaw. I don't know what he traded it for, but a small hacksaw. And every chance he got, he would hack away at that hole where the light was so that it would be big enough for him to fit through. Which, I don't get that either. Like, no one saw him taking a hacksaw to the ceiling, and after the hole was made bigger, how did the light fixture fit back up in it to camouflage the hole? I have questions. I'm so confused. But anyway, this man was able to get on the top bunk, squeeze himself through that itty bitty hole in the ceiling into a crawl space. And he figured out how to get into the jailer's apartment through the crawl space. He took off his prisoner clothes, put on civilian clothes of the jailer, and just walked out the front door. I don't understand. Was it incompetence on the jailers, or was he that smart? I don't really think he was that smart. So it's just, like I said, and I will continue to say, it's just, this is a bizarre case. Ted Bundy had a friend named Carol Ann Boone that they had worked together. There was no romance involved at the beginning, but they would later marry. And she was smuggling money into him. So when he was able to escape, so I don't know why they did not get her as an accomplice, but when he left the jail on December 30th, 1977, he had the money that Carol Ann Boone had somehow smuggled into him. There is a theory as to how she did it, but I don't want to say that on YouTube. Use your imagination. So he took a bus to Denver, a plane to Chicago, and then an Amtrak to Ann Arbor, Michigan. And then while he was there, he just figured, I'll go in this bar and watch this football game. University of Washington was playing the University of Michigan. And he almost got beat up by University of Michigan fans because he was rooting for the University of Washington. Then he spent the night in the sanctuary of a Methodist church before stealing a car and driving to Atlanta. He abandoned the car and took a bus to Tallahassee. He told Stephen Mashad that he picked Florida because it was exactly on the opposite end of the country from Washington and because it was warm. He didn't have enough money to buy a lot of winter clothing, which he realized when he escaped, that the cold was a problem when he escaped the first time. On January 5th, 1978, a federal warrant was issued for his arrest. There was no central database back then, and the term serial killer hadn't even been coined yet. And the different agencies didn't speak to one another. We didn't have APHIS and what's the other one? APHIS is the fingerprint one. VICAP, the violent criminal offender, whatever that thing's called. There was none of that back then, and jurisdictions didn't talk to one another. So 5 different states he's in, and nobody knows what's happening in the other states. On January 8th, Nita Neary was driven home by her boyfriend to the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. The car headlights illuminated one of the rooms, and she saw a man fleeing the house. When she got inside, she started to call the police about the strange man when one of her housemates came out of her room dazed and bloody. Now, what happened was these rooms, I didn't stay in dorms when I was in college. I lived close enough that I commuted. So I don't know, like, not even the average size of a dorm room. But anyway, well, it wasn't a dorm, it was a sorority house. But one of the girls, I believe it was 22-year-old Karen Chandler, she survived. And there was firewood, which surprises me because it's Tallahassee, which is northern Florida, but anyway, so there was firewood stacked up outside the sorority, and that is what he used to beat these women with. And Karen Chandler said that the room was so small and he had the log and he would hit her and then could hit the other girl with the other end of the log. So he was fighting 2 at once with a log. And then when Nita Neary and her boyfriend drove up, the headlights went through the window and he thought he'd been seen and he freaked out and he ran. And that saved Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner's life. Karen Chandler had a broken jaw, 4 teeth knocked out. She also suffered a broken right arm and a crushed index finger. And Kathy Kleiner was 20 years old, and she had been hit so hard with a piece of wood that she said her cheek was split to the point that it was like flapping, like it was separated. They did both survive, but 2 other sorority sisters that were in another room weren't as lucky. Lisa Levy was only 20 years old. She was beaten with a log and essayed. She had a bite mark on her butt, and one of her nipples had nearly been bitten off. These bites would lead to Bundy's downfall. Margaret Elizabeth Bowman was also a Chi Omega, and she was 21 years old when Bundy beat her to death. After leaving the sorority house, Bundy broke into an apartment by climbing through a kitchen window. That apartment belonged to Cheryl Thomas. This is so sad. She was a dance major at FSU. She was brutally beaten, which left her permanently deaf. And I can think of very little that is sadder than a dance major not being able to hear the music anymore. Her neighbor heard the struggle and called her to see if she was all right, and it spooked Ted Bundy and saved her life. On February 9th, 12-year-old Kimberly Diane Leach was taken from her middle school in Lake City, Florida. I actually went to high school with one of Kimberly Leach's friends who had gone to the same middle school as she did. So that's how close I was to where all this happened. One of the stolen credit cards found in Bundy's car was traced back to a Lake City hotel. After 8 weeks of searching, her body was found disposed of at a pig farm. On February 15th, Bundy was stopped for driving erratically again in Pensacola, Florida. This man always got caught on a traffic violation. He needed to drive better if he was going to do all that stuff and get away with it, because that's what got him caught. He told the policeman that he was an FSU law student and he resisted arrest, but the cop was able to subdue him and he was arrested. And in some of the pictures that you see in the crime pictures of Ted Bundy, he's got a mark on his face. And I don't know, it looks like a scrape. I don't know if he scraped it on the pavement when they were fighting, but the policeman subdued him by hitting him with the butt of his gun in the head. So I don't think he hit him in the face with the butt of a gun, because that would have made much bigger damage and probably he would have gotten in trouble for doing that. But Bundy has a scrape on his cheek in some of the pictures. When they searched his car, they found his kill kit and 21 credit cards that had been stolen from FSU students. And there was one credit card that had been stolen from a Chi Omega student at a bar. He refused to tell him his real name. He gave them the name Keith Meisner. Once again, fingerprints aren't linked together. History of crime is not linked together. Jurisdictions don't talk to each other. So you might say, well, why didn't they just fingerprint him to find out who he was? Well, they did fingerprint him, but there was no central fingerprint database back then to compare him to. So he told them his name was Keith Meisner. So they checked. I don't know how they checked, but they checked somehow, and they found the real Meisner, who said, no, that's not me. And because he refused to identify himself, he was denied bond. Because if you're not even going to tell somebody who you are, of course you're a flight risk. You're being evasive. But he finally told them his name in exchange for being allowed to call Elizabeth Kepfler, his ex-girlfriend. Ted was held in a secured part of the jail with 3 locks on his cell. I don't know. One night, the sheriff took Ted for a ride. Now, I'm not sure what the pretense was, but he said he just took Ted out for a ride and it just seemed like they were just driving around. And then they finally pulled up to a building, and then it was a warehouse or a storage facility or something like that. And when they raised up the door, there were 3 men in lab coats standing there. He'd taken Ted to have bite impressions done. And I don't know why they did it there. Why, and that I just thought they could get him there easier if he didn't have a clue what was happening. I have so many questions about this case. So Ted freaked out and went berserk, and they physically had to force him into the chair. But when they did, he calmed down and he told them to go ahead and take the impressions. But what I found really hilarious, in one of the sources, it said it took 6 men to hold his jaws open. And I'm thinking, how does that work? You can't even get 6 hands in there to hold somebody's jaw open. I think they meant it took 6 men to get him restrained into the chair to do the impressions. They could not find an impartial jury in Tallahassee, so the trial took place in Miami. And contrary to popular belief, I believe this too. Like, this was my first serial killer on my radar. Like, the first time I even knew that serial killers existed. Because this happened so close to where I lived. And I had always thought that he always represented himself. But he didn't. And now I really, really want to find the trial and watch it, because now I realize that I was totally wrong about so many things, because I'd never done a deep dive like this before. So he did not represent himself in the Miami trial. Not really. His defense attorney's name was Michael Minerva. On June 1st, 1978, a plea deal was worked out for life in prison, and that he would not get the death penalty. But When they went to court and he stood up, instead of agreeing to the plea, he fired his attorney. He said that his attorney just wanted him to shut up and look innocent. He also didn't trust his attorney because he wanted Ted to take a plea. He believed that Minerva viewed him as guilty and wasn't trying to win his case. The defense attorney's job is to get you the best deal that is the most beneficial to you. And in this case, there was no question that he committed the crime. So they said, plea deal, we just won't do the death penalty. He'll have to stay in jail for the rest of his life. And because of that, Ted viewed it as this attorney was really not trying to help his case, that he just wanted it over and done with and wanted Ted in jail just like everybody else. But that's not how it works. He was doing his job as an attorney. And the judge allowed Ted to represent himself. He said he could represent himself. He could be in charge, but he did want Minerva and his team to stay on as standby counsel. The trial started on July 1st, 1978. There was media from all 50 states and 9 foreign countries. It was a circus.
I'm not going through this. You do that, Your Honor. Sit down. You know how far you can push me. You want to make a circus? You've got a circus. We'll have a small ring on your parade, Jack. You'll see a thunderstorm. This will not be the path that'll draw me you to range. Buddy, sit down. It's not to be a party. They say a clean kind of party. You understand? Okay.
And if there's any more delay in this court's proceeding occasioned by your voluntary acts, we're proceeding without you.
Since I have been in Dade County, I've been allowed to
shake your finger at me, young man. Don't shake your finger at me, young man.
So this was Ted's time to shine and get all the attention. All eyes were on him, and he wanted to run his own defense, which the judge said he could do. But he's also supposed to take the advice of his standby counsel. So his questioning was erratic and strange, and he cross-examined this crime scene technician, the person that was one of the first on the scene that saw the carnage that he left behind. He had this man relate in great detail every single thing that he saw. Basically, Bundy was just wanting to relive the crime scene by hearing the technician talk about what a horrible crime scene it was. And he would ask the same questions over and over again until the point that the prosecution had to start objecting on the grounds that had been asked and answered. So his standby counsel's team told him that that was not a good move for his case, and that they needed to be more strategic in who did the questionings and what questions were asked. And then the council started bickering back and forth with Ted about who was going to do the questioning, what questions were going to be asked, and it was just a tense atmosphere. It was not a comfortable situation for the defense team to be in. Bundy made strange motions during the trial, too. He stood up and directly told the judge that he wanted these things. Not all at once, but at different times during the trial. He wanted a change of menu because he was tired of eating grilled cheese sandwiches every day. He also told the judge that the light in his cell was so poor that he couldn't read. So the judge actually checked on the lighting in his cell himself and found it inadequate. So Ted got more lighting in his cell. He also wanted more exercise time. And he asked the judge for all these things in open court. I'm just so glad that Bundy was not allowed to cross-examine her. I'm glad that Bundy was never allowed to cross-examine any of these victims. So the lawyer then asked the judge, "Your Honor, may I be excused?" And the judge said yes, and he left for the rest of the day. I did see him in some footage that was after he got fired, so he was still on the team, but he just left for the rest of the day. Minerva himself went to Miami to do the cross-examination of the forensic odontologist that was presenting the bite mark evidence. The jury was out for 6.5 hours. On July 24th, 1979, Bundy was found guilty of 2 murders and 3 attempted murders. He was sentenced to death. During sentencing, the judge lamented the waste of a good young mind and told him that he would have been a good lawyer. He even said that he would have liked to see him practice law in his court. That judge was cool. I really did like that judge. Kimberly, oh, this is the bizarre one. This is the bizarre trial. Kimberly Leach's trial started in November of 79 in Orlando. This time, Bundy did represent himself 100%, and he only had one witness. It was a character witness, and it was Carol Ann Boone, his former co-worker. The only reason he wanted her on the stand was so they could get married. There's an old Florida law. I don't know if it's still on the books. Like I said, this is the 70s. There's an old Florida law stating that a declaration of marriage in court in front of a judge is considered an agreement. And the pair could not find a minister to oversee their vows, and the officials at the Orange County Jail wouldn't let them use the facility's chapel. So Bundy discovered a loophole, and it was the shortest wedding I've ever seen.
Bundy actually proposed to Carol Ann while she was testifying on his behalf at the penalty phase of his murder trial in Florida.
Will you marry me? Yes. And I do hereby.
Somehow, Carol Ann conceived a child with Bundy. Her name is Rosa. It's unclear whether or not a guard was bribed to look the other way. She also smuggled in drugs to him as well. His post-conviction lawyer was Polly Nelson. Now, this woman, I believe her logic is sound, but I do not agree with her. She was convinced that Bundy was incompetent because he genuinely believed that he was going to be found not guilty. I don't think that constitutes incompetence. I don't know, maybe legally it does, but I don't think so. So there was a psych eval and a competency hearing, and Bundy was found to be bipolar. There are a lot of bipolar people in this world that never murder anybody. At one point, he received a stay of execution because they thought that he had a brain tumor. Because for some reason, you can't execute somebody that's not well. As his execution date got closer, he started confessing in order to get a stay of execution. Detectives came from all the states involved. Against the advice of his attorney told him not to do this. He confessed to over 30 murders, but there thought to be many more. He told the Leon County Sheriff that there were women in 3 digits across 6 states. So I don't think we're ever going to know the real extent of his crimes. I'm almost certain there's more than 30. On January 24th, 1989, he was executed in Old Sparky. And yes, we call it Old Sparky. That's our electric chair. There was a party outside the prison. There were vendors selling t-shirts that said, "Burn, Ted, burn." It was compared to like a carnival or a concert type atmosphere. It was crazy. Some of Bundy's victims have never been found and their cases are still open. 4 victims were dumped on Taylor Mountain. I believe that's in Washington. Brenda Ball, Linda Healy, Susan Rancourt, and Roberta Parks. Those were his Washington victims. The women abducted from Lake Sammamish, Janice Ott and Denise Naslin, were found at another site on the mountain a little ways away from the other 4. Bundy confessed that he also dumped Donna Matson's body there as well, but she's never been found. In 1980, journalists Stephen Michaud and Hugh Ainsworth decided to write a book about Bundy. He was still claiming to be innocent at the time. Ainsworth went about investigating the crimes that he claimed to be innocent of, and Michaud went to Florida to interview Ted in prison. And Ted wanted a book written about his childhood, his life, who he was, his political aspirations, yada, 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 just nonsense. He didn't want a book to be written about his crimes, and he wouldn't even talk about them, which was the whole reason why Stephen Michaud went to see him. So Stephen said, "You're a psych guy. Tell me about the guy that did all this. How would he go about it? What would he do? What would be his mindset? Where would he dispose of the bodies?" So Ted started talking about himself in the third person as he described his crimes. So he knew things that only the killer would know, but he's still talking in the third person, denying that he did it. Stephen Michaud says he has about 100 hours of Bundy on tape, and it's now the subject of a Netflix docuseries called Conversations with a Killer, the Ted Bundy tapes. So, that's it for Ted Bundy, and that's it for 2022, and it's almost it for season 1. We have 2 more episodes. Okay, guys, so that does it. And I will see you next year. I hope everybody has a wonderful, wonderful new year. And don't drink too much and don't get in trouble on New Year's Eve. But have fun if you do and be safe. And remember, be kind to people, love your family. And I'll see you next year. Bye. Thank you, guys. It's been great. I love y'all. Keep watching. I'm not going anywhere. Bye.